So there's a whole ton of Space Marines out there in Warhammer 40K, and certainly in the more recent Primaris era, there's a vast amount of squads and different ways to field your power armoured warriors. For each Space Marine infantry unit out there, let's talk through the lore, their war gear, and how they tend to engage with the enemy. Have a look at their current model kit from Games Workshop, what miniatures do you get, any fun details, any ways to get them cheaper and more. And then take a look at their rules when you put them on the tabletop, what they do in game, what are their advantages and disadvantages compared with their peers, and how would I be tempted to field them in battle. For this one I'm going to be sticking to core Codex Space Marines, as believe me that's far too many units to be going on with to start with, so if people enjoy this format of video I might make a few equivalent ones for other armies and chapters. Let's jump right into it though and start with perhaps the most logical place, which is the standard Intercessor. In the Primaris era, Intercessor squads are basically your standard battle line Space Marines, who are of course every man a fearsome prospect, genetic enhancements and extra organs making them stronger than a regular human in every way, clad in indomitable ceramite power armour and wielding the Holy Bolter. Basically an assault rifle that fires small explosive rockets. The Intercessor's bolt weapon is a particularly powerful one in the bolt rifle as well, with increased range and stopping power versus many of the bolt carbines and other bolt weapons that Space Marines employ or other Imperial factions. For the Intercessors themselves, they tend to fight on the battle line, often being one of the more numerous and mainstay troops in the army, and the majority of standard Space Marine battle company forces will typically include a few squads of them, one of their biggest advantages being their flexibility, being able to hold a defensive position, push an assault, and just generally obliterate most infantry enemies that the Astartes might come across. They're basically the Primaris era equivalent of the flexible tactical squad. They're being deployed maybe a bit more Great Crusade style, with all bolt weapons as opposed to specials and heavies mixed into the units, and their name basically comes from interceding to intervene on the behalf of another, stepping up to bear the brunt of the enemy firepower, and it's often used in relation to prayer as well, which I guess goes with the whole Space Marine warrior monk thing that they have going on. For their miniature kit, you get 10 of them in a box set, maybe not too terrible value as Warhammer goes at £40 or $62, as we'll see lots of Space Marine kits will charge you far more per Marine than these guys. I feel like the overall Primaris design looks fairly sharp. People did quite enjoy the chunky feel and better proportion of these when they came out at the start of 8th edition, and these guys are fairly straightforward and not particularly adorned. The basic troops maybe not supposed to be the star of the show, they can still be a good blank canvas to add a bit of theme to any one given chapter to. For their wargear options, they do have a few ways in which you can customise the bolt rifles with different magazines and things. Previously they had in-game rules that made them different, though mercifully Games Workshop did away with that. A few different poses like this guy changing a mag, and they do have a special weapon with an underslung grenade launcher. The kit doesn't come with all the sergeant weapons that you might want though. Weirdly enough, they're in a rule space where they only actually get access to things like Thunderhammers and Power Fists due to some chapter specific upgrade kits at the moment, like the Salamander's one where you can give a sergeant a Thunderhammer. In general, they've typically tended to be at least fairly cheap relative to other Astartes to pick up, maybe more in 8th edition than now, but they still appear in several Combat Patrol box sets, including this Dark Angels one, and it means you might be able to find them going a little cheaper online separately. Rules-wise, they're a battle line Space Marine unit, so you can field lots of them, 80 points for 5 or 160 for 10, and they've got the standard issue Space Marine stat line that we'll see a lot in this one, 2 wounds at toughness 4 with a 3+ save, not bad against small arms, but certain damage 2 weapons make very short work of them. For a base troop, the Intercessor bolt rifles are very punchy indeed, 2 shots at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1, they have the assault and heavy keywords, so boosted damage if they're static, and can move faster if they're not. The other thing that makes them really impressive is their target elimination, basically double shooting if you fire all the Intercessors at one unit. That means you can get 20 bolt shots plus a grenade launch out of an 80-point squad. It's just monstrously efficient against horde enemies for the points cost. While they might be good at bullying lighter infantry and more competitive lists, they often tend to get taken for their special rule with sticky objectives. If they take a point, then if you move off it, it will remain yours, and that gives you really good options if you put that on the home field. It means that late in the game, if the opponent isn't going to be able to get there, you can send anything that was guarding them to fight for the midfield in one last dash for kills, glory and points. As a result, between some strong anti-horde damage and a really good special rule, they're in near auto-include status for Space Marines right now. Lots of armies just take 1 squad of 5 to be able to put that on the homeboard objective. You can take more if you like, and they can go well with certain characters, perhaps characters that you want on the board and safe somewhere, but not necessarily to have a fighty retinue alongside. Overall, I rate them very strong, and I give them a 9 out of 10 for power. The regular Intercessors are far from the only troops choice that the Space Marines have to choose from though. For more close combat orientated chapters, you can now field Assault Intercessors as a direct equivalent. For fighty chapters like the Blood Angels, you can get stuck into glorious melee combat, wielding a heavy bolt pistol and chainsword. Really quite an iconic weapon to the 40k setting, which can quickly eviscerate enemy infantry. For their model kit, they were introduced at the start of 9th edition, initially coming out in the Indomitus box set with a monopose unit, and as a result, you can often find quite a lot of them going second hand for cheap. For their current box set on sale though, you get 10 models for similar sort of prices to the Intercessors, not so enormously different to the regular Intercessors, but specced for melee with their chainswords, maybe some slightly more dynamic poses with some running ones and things. The Sergeant does get some specialist weapons in this one with a Thunderhammer, Power Fist, Hand Flamer and Plasma Pistol. For the Sons of Sanguinius who particularly get on well with them, there's a set of 10 of them in the Blood Angels Combat Patrol box set, and that comes alongside their upgrade sprue, which means that they basically use these same models to represent their Death Company on foot. In game, they're a little cheaper than the regular Intercessors, they have the same stat line, and they also have OC2, so a good weight on objectives, often fielded in 5s for 75 points with a Sergeant with a fancy Power Fist. Their standard chainswords and heavy bolt pistols will be really bad news for any sort of lighter enemy infantry though. 4 attacks each in melee with strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1, excellent for chewing through termagants or chaos cultists and their equivalents. Though perhaps one of the single biggest draws and standout things for the unit is their special rule. This one's called Shock Assault. It allows the entire unit to reroll wound rolls of 1, but more importantly, if they attack something or an objective, then they can reroll all wound rolls. That's really quite big and makes them excellent just for charging into the mid-board and killing whatever was trying to take the points. And maybe the single best thing about that is that it can apply to attached characters as well, which fight far harder than the regular Intercessors, so it could do well with a Space Marine Captain or a good number of other characters such as say Azrael or Uriel Ventris or Vulcan Hestan. Overall, I'd certainly rate them pretty usable, fairly nice damage dealing, and you can just throw them in as small squads to skirmish for the midboard. They certainly feel more standout for armies like Blood Angels and Black Templars, which can get some serious melee buffs on the go, and particularly to give characters their rerolls, say the Emperor's Champion or a Fighty Captain with Rage Fueled Warrior in Blood Angels Liberator Assault Group. Overall, some pretty nasty close combat Marines there. I've given them an 8 out of 10 for power. Finally, for the Primaris battle line options, we've got the Heavy Intercessors, and they're clad in one of the 2 major Mark 10 armour variations from Tacticus with the Gravis armour, featuring much thicker armour that offers additional protection, plus a distinctive cowl that goes over the head. The armour sacrifices a bit on mobility, but it means that the Space Marines wearing it can wade heedless through enemy small arms fire, and absolutely dominate straight fire fights between them and their peers. These guys typically get deployed in this fashion when a chapter needs to prioritise an immovable defence, basically fielding chunky Space Marines with bigger bolters and enormous range, who'll be able to lay their foes low from extreme distance, and a bit of sacrifice and mobility isn't the worst thing in the world. Compared with standard Intercessors, their bolt rifles are also extra chunky. They've got 3 different variants of hard-hitting heavy bolt rifle that can fire at increased range with bigger shells, and might supplement that with a heavy bolter or 2 in the squad. Typically they tend to be fielded most by chapters specialising in ranged defence tactics, so things like the Imperial Fists, Iron Hands and Salamanders might particularly enjoy. Model kit wise, the Heavy Intercessors come 5 models to a box for $65, £42 or €55, and I must admit I did feel like they were priced maybe a little bit painfully compared with a lot of their equivalents, just really quite expensive and the same price as Space Marine Terminators, or half the models in the box set versus the regular or Assault Intercessors. Gravis armour definitely has its fan. I feel like these guys were pretty well received when they came out. Big extra chunky Space Marines with absolutely enormous bolt rifles, and 1 model per 5 can be armed with a heavy bolter, though the Sergeant doesn't get any special weapons in this unit. They first came out sort of early to midway through 9th edition in a kill team set versus the Necrons, and they also have a sort of equivalent themed captain to lead them, also armed with a heavy bolt rifle. For a recent release they also have some available at discount in the Imperial Fist Combat Patrol set. In game they're another battle line squad, 100 points for 5 of them or 200 for 10. The Gravis armour does give them pretty markedly improved protection compared with their standard Space Marine equivalents, 3 wounds at toughness 6, so they're not really going to care about things of strength 4 or 5 quite so much. Plasma weapons and other damage 2 won't kill them quite so fast, and their special rule even helps them out further against damage 1 weapons. They get to improve saving throws against them. Then for their weapons, their bigger bolters throw out bigger shells, basically getting bolt rifles of a similar sort of spec to the Intercessor ones, but firing out to 30-inch range with strength 5 and damage 2. So really quite big chunky bolter ordnance there. Though it was maybe a bit weird that the Intercessors caught up quite so much in terms of damage dealing with these guys when they got the rule to basically fire twice. In 10th edition they've sort of been a kind of mid-power Space Marine unit, really easy to use with some big stats and good defense, but usually in more optimised lists they get passed up for other options with more powerful special rules, things like the Intercessors and their sticky objectives in particular, all manner of Space Marine utility units, and if you want damage dealers people generally tend to look elsewhere as they're not really all that dangerous for the points cost. They're far from unusable though, could be alright in the Anvil Siege Force, or maybe be a bodyguard for Tor Garadon or Ironfather Pharos. I've rated them a 6.5 out of 10 for in-game power. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor and Tabletop Stronghold. They're one option to get your Space Marines from A to B in safety, with their range of magnetic carry cases made by Sam based in West Virginia in the USA. Magnetic storage for Warhammer miniatures has certainly got far more popular over the past few years, the idea being to mount magnets to the bottom of your bases, and then they attach to magnetic surfaces within the case, and that means that you can safely store loads of miniatures side by side in really quite a small space, without needing foam to insulate them, or with the danger of them bashing on each other or ruining the paint job. Tabletop Stronghold's particular solution to this are the mag cases, really sturdy boxes made of MDF, notably hard to break or damage when put together, and then they have slide in and out steel trays that you can raise or lower the level of, depending on the height of the miniatures that you want to transport. On the front of the case goes a clear acrylic sheet that protects the models, and also quite nice to be able to both see your nice paint jobs and see what's where. Broadly speaking, reviews of these have tended to be really quite positive on Reddit and things. I've certainly seen them handle customer service things well in the past. As well as the cases, they also have a competitive terrain set, a little cheaper if you pick one up, so it could be of interest if you're picking one up anyway. But in any case, you can check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff. I'll cycle back to them at the end of the video to talk through their range. If you do buy anything, they gave me a code for AT25 as well, so that can save a bit on their cases if you do pick up anything. Finally, for the units considered battle line at the moment in 40k, moving on from the Primaris troops, we have the firstborn ones, and this is the standard Space Marine Tactical Squad. These have typically been the standard troops of the army, going back to classic kits when Warhammer 40k first came out, and basically have the same sort of flexible generalist vibe as the Intercessors, as a squad that can fill the battle line and handle a wide variety of targets and enemies. Tactical squads are fielded in units of 10, often dividing roles and splitting into combat squads to go after different objectives, and in the most classic Codex Astartes form they're fielded with a heavy weapon and special weapon, so the squad's still capable of engaging and destroying more armoured foes. Classically, in prior Space Marine lore, Space Marines would rotate through Assault and Devastator squads before acting as Tactical Marines to better master all aspects of war. They're pretty iconic to the Warhammer 40k setting, and one place that a whole load of people will probably have seen them in action are the Astartes animations, which did an awesome job of representing the sheer speed, brutality, and efficiency that even the most standard of Space Marines can demonstrate. Models wise, the box set is a little cheaper than some of the Primaris ones, £37 or $60 for 10 models, and they are one of the last holdouts of the pre-Primaris range, only a few infantry kits dating from before then now. It does mean that they stand a bit shorter in stature than their Primaris brothers, unfortunately. For the kit itself though, it's really not that old relative to a bunch of other armies in Warhammer 40k. Their Mark 7 or rather angry looking helms are pretty iconic to the way that Warhammer 40k Space Marines have generally been in the past, and they do have quite a few fun options with different special weapon options and sergeant gear, plus a missile launcher as a heavy weapon, though if you want to access the other ones they can take, you'd have to get those from the Devastator Squad. Perhaps one of the biggest questions with these guys and other firstborn kits is what Games Workshop's going to do with them in 11th edition. They've shown they're not particularly shy of just flat out removing models from the range when it suits them. I'm genuinely unsure which way they'll go with tactical squads, whether they'll make them into a variant version of the Intercessor, and maybe have a sort of halfway squad where you have some of the special weapons added in as a new way to interest people in Intercessors again, or whether they will just be fully phased out and Intercessors will be the standard way to go for Primaris troops. It would feel like a shame not to have these guys at the core of the Space Marine army though. They've got a bit of a heritage going back a very long way to the earliest days of 40k. Putting them on the tabletop at the moment, they're 140 points and they're locked to 10 models only, so you have to commit into them in quite a big way. For their datasheet features, they've got OC2, so more waste on objectives than most Space Marines. Most of them have standard bolters, which are significantly less punchy than the bolt rifles, and only fewer attacks than Primaris in melee, but can supplement their firepower with their melter gun, multi-melter, and some sergeant weapons. Usually having a full 10 squad isn't the most efficient thing that you can do in 40k, but to put them on a level playing field with the other, they've got their combat squad rule, maybe put the dangerous things in one unit and the basic bolters in another to do some objective grunt work, though it does kind of feel like you're just giving them a rule that other Primaris squads have anyway, as you can already take them in 5s and they don't get a different special rule on top of that. Overall, between all that, they're really not useless. They're some of the cheapest Space Marines that you can field right now. Backfield bolters are low investment, and their special and heavy weapons can pack a punch jumping out of a rhino perhaps, though I still argue that for most armies they tend to be pretty suboptimal right now. I'd rate them a 5 out of 10 for power. Next up, let's move on to a few heavily armoured elite Space Marines, and first up we have the Aggressors. Like the heavy Intercessors, these guys are also clad in sturdy Gravis armour, so are up-armoured compared with most. But rather than conducting their warfare at long range, these guys are often deployed when fighting in close confines as needed, such as dense cities, twisted jungles, or ship boarding actions. Their Gravis armour can give them a measure of protection there, where durability perhaps matters more so than speed. While they still do have melee threats, their primary role tends to be in fire support. They're armed with really high volume fire weapons to absolutely obliterate enemy infantry formations. Twin belt-fed Boltstorm gauntlets can shatter the enemy in a huge array of explosive bolter shells, and is paired with a shoulder-mounted Fragstorm grenade launcher. And even the deployment of a few Space Marine aggressors can obliterate an entire infantry formation. Their other primary wargear option are dual Flamestorm gauntlets, and as ever are particularly enjoyed by the Salamanders, a good fit for them being heavily armoured and getting some of their flamecraft on the go. When they're assailed in direct hand-to-hand combat, they're no less lethal though. They've got paired power fists built in with their ranged weapons, and that can allow them to engage more armoured targets. For the Aggressors box set, they're a 3-model Elite box set, which maybe doesn't usually tend to be the best news for value. Games Workshop's 3-model box sets tend to be really quite expensive per model. They're $60 for 3 or £37 at time of recording. I feel like out of the Primaris lineup when they first came about, these guys were fairly well received. Fairly fun chunky Space Marines with some classic tropes with them, big armoured warriors, pairing power fists with bolt weapons, and the feel of a nice big threat damage dealer. Though when they first released them, there was some speculation as to whether or not they were in theory supposed to be the Primaris replacement for Terminators. They do have quite a lot of parallels with big armour and similar style wargear, though obviously Games Workshop's kept both of those armour marks going. Despite their similarities, I do feel like they do feel like their own distinct things quite well. Here's their dual build option, swapping out those Boltstorm gauntlets for the Flamestorm ones. That variant doesn't get the Fragstorm grenade launcher. In-game, they're quite a pricey centerpiece unit, 100 points for 3 of them, and the bigger squad pays a premium, going up to 220. They've got the same Gravis stat line as the heavy Intercessors, though given they pay so many more points for it, they're not really all that durable for the cost. But basically, if they do get in close, they will deal quite a lot of damage, particularly to enemy lighter infantry. No matter which loadout you go for, you get a good volume of Strength 4 AP0 attacks that go up to AP-1 if they shoot the closest thing. And the Power Fist having 3 attacks that are twin linked at Strength 8 and Damage 2 means that'll be pretty general purpose and effective against most stuff in melee. I feel like typically Aggressors are a unit that sort of needs big investments to justify taking in the first place. They're short ranged but big damage, so it makes sense to invest points in getting them there, and then making sure that big damage is hitting with the absolute biggest threat when they do. You might often see them deployed by Land Raider, maybe with something like an Apothecary Biologist leading them, or a Gravis Captain maybe in the Firestorm Assault Force, and then using any big damage dealer stratagems to help them hit extra hard. Currently, I'd still say their points cost is a bit north of where it really needs to be. It wasn't really helped too much by the Apothecary Biologist getting a lot more expensive mid-edition. I still say they're usable enough, particularly in Firestorm, where getting Strength 5 on their weapons and the Assault keyword is no bad thing, but I would quite like to see a small points cut on them. I've given them a 6.5 out of 10, not unusable if built around and played with very carefully, but not quite as easy to use as certain other Space Marine damage dealers. Moving on to one of the other best known Space Marine units out there, and their more classic armoured elites in the Terminator squads. These guys are elite veterans fighting in the famous tactical dreadnought Terminator armour. Powerful relic suits of artificer plates, powered by internal motors, and allowing the bearer to wield heavier weapons they would normally be able to, each one with the Crux Terminators on the left shoulder pad, believed to be able to ward off enemy fire with a fragment of the Emperor's own armour in it. These suits typically tend to be a precious resource for the chapter, so the use of them is given to the chapter's first company veterans only. Even there though, they're rare and an expensive resource to maintain. Most chapters out there aren't able to field their entire first company in Terminator plate, though the ones that are particularly renowned for it, such as the Dark Angel's Deathwing. In battle, they typically use teleport tactics to get where they need to be, appearing out of nowhere to bring a surgical strike right to the heart of the enemy, typically blazing away with mass storm bolters at range, a high rate of fire version of the regular bolt gun, and then using powerful power fists to take down enemy heavies in close combat, like the Aggressors that are also often used at close quarters, including clearing Space Hulks quite notably. Generally, they often tend to crop up whenever the fighting gets nastiest, all the way from the Horus Heresy up to the current 40k setting. They certainly had a starring role in the Leviathan trailer at the start of 10th edition when they redid the Terminator models. I particularly enjoyed the Assault Cannon Terminator shredding the Tyranid monstrosities, though it did meet a grisly end at the hands of a Tyranid Prime. Models-wise, their resculpts from the start of 10th edition were particularly well received. For the standard Terminator box set, it's 5 models for $65 or £42. And usually Terminator units tend to be pretty powerful models in game, and often tend to get you quite a lot of points for the amount of money that you spend. It might mean they're not the worst thing for newer players to pick up. I quite enjoyed their redesign with their big chunky armour, and upscaled with some slightly better proportions than the ones in the past, while still not really deviating too far from their look that we all know and love. A standard Terminator kit has 3 heavy weapon choices: Assault Cannon, Heavy Flamer, or Cyclone Missile Launcher. The regular Terminators can swap out the Power Fist for Chain Fists if they want a bit more punch going through enemy armoured vehicles, and they also come with a Teleporter Homer model, with one option to guide them where they're going to be warping into the battle. As well as the regular kit, there's also the Monopose version, which comes in the 40k starter box set. That one only has the Assault Cannon, though are still very nice sculpts, and it does mean that you might be able to get your hands on them a bit cheaper than otherwise. Terminators often tend to be one way that chapters like to express their personality, so several chapters have their own unique versions of them. The 2 that have been redone since 10th edition have been the Dark Angels Deathwing Knights and the Space Wolves Wolfguard Terminators. In game, it's 170 points for 5 Terminators, or 340 for an enormous squad of 10. They've got a really tough stat line with 3 wounds at toughness 5, a 2+ save, and a 4+ invulnerable. Realistically, that usually makes them far tougher to take out than Gravis armor, even if they're 1 point of toughness less. And as with their teleports, they can get into battle via Deep Strike if you want to, so it could be an option to deliver via Rapid Ingress, dropping down somewhere nearby in the opponent's turn, so when it's your turn they can walk up to the enemy and make a very close charge indeed. For their durability and deep strike though, it does mean that their damage output is a bit on the mid to low side. The Stormbolters at range only really tend to be good for clearing out lighter infantry, and the Power Fist might struggle to punch up against really tough vehicles, though Boosted Oath of Moment can help, and they are better against the Oath targets with their Fury of the First. Unfortunately, it has meant that they've been a pretty weak unit through 10th edition so far. I just feel like they cost a bit much for what they bring to the table at the moment, so could either do with a rules buff or a points drop. They are quite a flexible datasheet and at least fairly forgiving, given they're harder to kill than most Space Marines though. I've given them a 6 out of 10 for in-game power. Otherwise, for their dedicated melee counterpart, there's the Terminator Assault Squad, basically all the same stuff that standard Terminators do, but rather than the Stormbolter and Power Fist loadout, they swap those out for dedicated close combat weapons, either Thunderhammers paired with powerful Storm Shields with Force Fields built in, or dual Lightning Claws to shred enemy infantry. Some chapters might have some particular affinity with those. The Blood Angels quite enjoy their Lightning Claws, whereas Salamanders or the Imperial Fist quite like their Thunderhammers and Storm Shields, Lysander being known to lead them on some Titan killing strikes. At present, their plastic model kit is awaiting an update though. For some reason, Games Workshop just did the standard tactical Terminators and didn't do the equivalent resculpt of the Terminator Assault Squad at 10th edition. They are a little cheaper, though to be honest I think if you want these guys, I'd either kit bash from the tactical ones or just wait for the new Assault ones to come out. There's a pretty reasonable chance they could be coming soon, either in a Space Marine release wave in late 10th edition or in the launch wave when 11th edition turns up, which is probably going to happen within the year. Each of their models can be armed with either the Thunderhammer and Storm Shields or the Lightning Claws though, so you can have an entire squad of either. And the Blood Angels have a unique version of their own still on sale as well. A dedicated Assault Terminator squad for the Sons of Sanguinius, even if they're perhaps better known for their jump troops. For their in-game rules, there are 180 points for 5 of them, or 360 for 10, the same stat line as the regular Terminators, and out of the 2 weapon options, the vast majority of people choose to take the Thunderhammers and Storm Shields in 10th edition. The hammers are reasonable enough Power Fist equivalents, basically trading a bit of accuracy for devastating wounds, but the big draw to that loadout is the extra wound that you get. Going up to 4 wounds makes these guys really quite tanky, and a lot of at least fairly common flat damage 3 weapons won't just be one-shotting Terminators one after the other. The Lightning Claws aren't awful, but being a bit less general purpose against tough stuff I don't think helps them too much. Again, I'd be tempted to try and get them where they need to be with Rapid Ingress. Unfortunately, their datasheet rule Terminator Assault is rather weak, causing a battle shock test. Overall, I would rate them a little better than the standard Terminators. They could be a good option for any sort of big synergy style things. You could do things like infiltrate them with an attached character in the Vanguard Spearhead, or anything that can help out their defense is quite nice. Maybe the Feel No Pain enhancement in the First Company Task Force if you wanted to field that. Generally like the regular Terminators though, just a bit more on the underpowered side compared with a lot of damage dealers. Again, I feel like they could do with being a little cheaper for what they do, and certainly faction-specific Terminators outcompete them by quite a big way. I've given them a 6.5 out of 10 overall. Next up, let's take to the skies with some Jump Pack Space Marines, another fairly classic bit of Space Marine kit. Power armoured warriors bounding forward on wings of fire, propelled through the air with great big blasting thrusts of a jump pack, and making impact with the enemy with an absolutely meteoric crash. The mass of the Assault Marine itself being about as much a weapon compared with the actual weapons that they're carrying. Taking over from the classic Assault Squad, the Jump Intercessors are now the name for the standard Primaris Marines with jump packs and chainswords, and tend to fill a similar sort of role to the Assault Intercessors but with more mobility. Able to be deployed by Space Marine gunships from higher up in the atmosphere, take down their targets and then redeploy with extreme speed. Lots of chapters use elements of these fast moving troops along with them, though as ever might be more heavily favoured by some, perhaps the Blood Angels and Raven Guard being the most notable for them. The Blood Angels with their love of flight, and the Raven Guard using their mobility to strike from the shadows. The Space Wolves are also notable for their use of their wild Sky Claws. The Jump Intercessors were models coming out towards the start of 10th edition. It was nice to see the standard Jump Assault Marines get redone, as before you had a generic version of them, you couldn't really redo things like the Blood Angels range. For their box set, there's 5 models in a box for £37 or $60. I feel like they're fairly nicely done. Not really over-adorned given that they're the standard jump pack guys as opposed to veterans. Quite a good sense of motion with them bounding forward, and Games Workshop have gone for the more sort of tactical rocks and scenery as opposed to flying bases with these. They have a few slightly different poses, and the Sergeant comes with a Power Fist in the box, and there's also a couple of plasma pistols in the set, one for the Sergeant and one for another guy. For discounts and getting them cheaper, these guys were in a big discount box set at the start of 10th edition. This one was a little bit unpopular at the time, so there might be a bit more chance of finding it than some other discounts out there. They also turn up in the Raven Guard box set, though another option could be to get your hands on some third-party 3D printed jump packs and do a bit of kit bashing with some cheaper Assault Intercessors. In-game, they're 90 points for a squad of 5 and 160 for a squad of 10, so a little cheaper if you filled them in a big, more sort of damage block style role. They move 12 inches with the fly keyword, and again they can deep strike into battle, and that makes them quite a nice utility unit for dropping in, skirmishing with their peers, and doing secondary objectives. Their damage output definitely isn't nothing. Chainswords do quite well against lighter infantry, but against tougher stuff they do have a Power Fist on the Sergeant to punch over a bit, a couple of plasma pistol shots, and their special rule is quite a nice one as well, the potential for mortal wounds for each guy that slams into melee, and between all that they're quite likely to take a chunk out of armoured targets as well. As with lore preferences, a couple of their best known chapters do well with them as well. All those chainsword attacks get on extra well with Blood Angels and the Liberator Assault group, +2 strength makes the chainsword profile far more relevant, and with Raven Guard they can accompany Kayvan Shrike too, making a really interesting unit that you can't shoot at long range. They're pretty standout there, though pretty usable for just about any Space Marine army really. Just a nice combo being fairly small, cheap and expendable, but also fast moving and can also pack a good punch. A couple of squads for skirmishing and objectives can do pretty well. I've given them an 8.5 out of 10 for power. For a bigger, chunkier and heavier flavour of jump pack, we've got the Primaris Inceptors though. These guys have got pretty enormous jump packs with which to bear Gravis armour aloft, so the heavier version of the Mark template, and they're typically deployed from very high altitude drops, zooming down into the enemy midst, and then halting their descent with their jump packs and the grav plates that they wear on their feet. That means that enemy positions that were previously safe can suddenly have heavily armed, armoured and mobile Space Marines in their midst, the Inceptors being armed with some good fire support with their dual pistols, either Assault Bolters or Plasma Exterminators, both of which have their preferred targets and high rates of fire. With that role, they're often one of the first units to come into contact with the enemy, typically deployed to operate independently, maybe behind the enemy lines, assassinating commanders, ammunition dumps, or cutting supply lines, and doing so incredibly quickly before moving on after the first strike, before a more serious retaliation catches up with them. Miniatures wise, they're another 3-man box, 3 models for $60 or £37. Big chunky Space Marines borne aloft with dual heavy pistols. I feel like they maybe had a bit more of a mid-reception than some of the other Primaris, criticisms often being that they just look a bit ungainly between the big size of the models, plus the grav plates on their feet are a bit curious. They've got the choice between those Plasma Exterminators or the Assault Bolter as pictured here. Otherwise, for aesthetics, they have the choice between their sort of welding mask enclosed helms or more standard Space Marine helmets on the left here. And these ones have got some of Games Workshop's curved flight stands, which they maybe tend to use less of these days. The ball and socket thing can be a little bit fiddly with the chance for the models to drop off them a bit after you've had them for a while. I generally tend to replace the tops of these with magnets on my models when I get them. When playing in-game, there are 120 points for 3 of them or 240 for 6. Their signature ability is that meteoric descent, and this one allows them to set up super close to the enemy, dropping in anywhere that's greater than 6 inches away rather than the normal 9. It means that lots of places that will be screened off and inaccessible are fair game for them, so they can jump onto the board and light the enemy up with heavy firepower, potentially things they'd really rather not get shot. For that firepower, you either have the choice of the Assault Bolters, 3 shots with a big sustained hits 2 at strength 5 and damage 2, or Plasma Exterminators, which if you're doing risky overcharging, go to strength 8 and a big damage 3. They're all twin linked as well. And they also do have quite nice keywords as well. The assault keyword for moving around nice and fast if they do survive on the board, and a pistol keyword to keep them firing even if they're locked in melee. The 2 weapons I think are kind of pleasingly well balanced. There's good arguments that you could take either of them. The assault bolters certainly make a mess of infantry in a much more convincing way, though the plasma exterminators do better against 3 wound infantry or toughness 10 and higher. Overall, for their points cost, I feel like they're pretty well balanced, solidly usable but not auto-include, maybe for most armies taken in small numbers as a luxury to be able to get to areas of the board that you wouldn't be able to, and deal damage to key enemy units that might be fragile and trying to hide. They're perhaps extra nice in the Vanguard Spearhead where they can return to reserves though, with lots of value in that close deep strike rule. If you can threaten to do that multiple times in the game, then that's all well and good. I gave them a 7.5 out of 10 for in-game power. Next up, and for another flavour of ranged jump pack Space Marine, we have the Suppressor Squad. These guys are slightly unusual, being clad in a unique armour Mark 10 Omnis armour, which has both design elements from the heavier Mark 10 Gravis armour and the lighter Phobos design, made more possible by being borne aloft on jump packs and grab plates. These guys are classically deployed along Vanguard forces, supporting some Phobos Marines and providing some heavier fire support against targets they might not be able to handle with their autocannons. As a result, they're a highly mobile heavy support force with accelerator autocannons, pretty sturdy weapons capable of taking down some of the heaviest infantry and enemy light vehicles, as well as actually destroying targets, though they can also be called upon to provide some covering fire, explosive autocannon shells making the enemy duck and cover while the Phobos Marines get to their targets. The miniature kit is maybe in one of the most unusual places out of just about anything of the Space Marines right now. They were initially available in the Shadow Spear box set, then a Space Marine Combat Patrol, and now the Vanguard Task Force box, where it's a big box with a whole load of Phobos Marines, and the Suppressors are bundled in as a monopose option. It means they're a pain to get a hold of if you just literally want a Suppressor Squad and nothing else, given they're locked to a box set that costs £87 or $150 or so. I don't know if Games Workshop might eventually get around to releasing a solo squad version. They're pretty much jump pack Devastators with autocannons though, and I remember people saying at the time that it felt like Games Workshop had jumped the shark a bit there. Some demand for Primaris Devastators and jump pack Space Marines, neither of which had happened in Primaris yet, and then Games Workshop decided to fuse the both into one thing. Models wise, they're fairly straightforward though. Big autocannons, similar sort of grav plates to the Inceptors, and some of those curved flying base stands once again. Here's the Vanguard Task Force box set that they're locked to, so you do have to get really quite a lot of other Space Marines if you want these guys. In game, they're 75 points to field a unit of 3 of them. You can't take any more. They're really quite a fragile unit for the points cost, with only toughness 4 and 2 wounds. It might be best getting where they need to be with Deep Strike, where they're one of the cheaper Deep Strike units that Space Marines can field right now. When they line up beads on their targets, they attack with their accelerator autocannons, 3 shots at strength 8, AP 1, damage 2. Though with the heavy keyword, it's maybe a bit annoying that they have to choose between either hitting on a 3+ or moving with their 12-inch move. Their special rule is at least a fairly helpful one, suppression fire, meaning that the enemy is -1 to hit, though the rule does get cancelled if the squad gets wiped out, which isn't ideal given that they're quite fragile. Overall, they've typically been pretty niche throughout 10th edition, not unusable between a bit of damage and some alright utility, though for any given battlefield role you can make some very strong arguments to take other units instead. I've given them a 6.5 out of 10 overall for in-game power. Next up, let's take a look at some Space Marine fire support units, starting with some Hellblasters. These guys typically being fielded in the sort of heavy fire support Devastator equivalent force of the Space Marines, armed with sinister and utterly lethal weapons called Plasma Incinerators. As with Intercessors, having entire squads of the same loadout again maybe harks back to Heresy era style squads, and the Plasma Incinerator is a pretty terrifying weapon to encounter en masse, enormously dangerous firepower with all the molten fury of the Heart of a Star, and typically tend to get used when the Space Marines are expecting armoured resistance with their supreme armour piercing, obliterating enemy heavy infantry and vehicles. Plasma weapons themselves tend to be high-tech, expensive to maintain, and also well known to be unstable with big risk to the bearer in Warhammer 40K. As a result, the plasma weapons tend to get entrusted to the chapter's finest marksmen to make up the Hellblaster squads. The vast majority of the time, Hellblasters will fight with supreme fire discipline, using the right amount of firepower to take down the target and no more, though in the direst of situations they can overload their own weapons, and when it's decided that that's necessary, the squad will do so unerringly, even if it likely means that malfunctions will happen, and Space Marines might be immolated on the spot then and there. The Dark Angels chapter is perhaps particularly well known for employing plasma weapons, having a vast armoury and lots of weapons dating back to the Dark Age of technology. For their box set, the Hellblasters have 10 models in the box at $62 or £40, so basically the same price as Intercessors, though you do get models that have really quite a lot more in-game threat. Plasma weapons en masse certainly have a bit of fun factor, both being really quite general purpose, dangerous, and also the risk of a fewer mishaps happening, so maybe tend to be at least fairly popular as they go. They are fairly straightforward Space Marines with special weapons though. Fairly standard Intercessor bodies, the main complexity of the models just coming from having a few different options of plasma weapons that you can field. You can assemble them all as heavy versions with a backpack fed pipe, which don't currently have different in-game rules representing them. The Hellblasters were some of the earliest Primaris Space Marines to get released. There were some in the Dark Imperium set against the Death Guard at the start of 8th edition. I still rate them as really quite a good unit to get if you're newer to a Space Marine army. They're fairly standout points for the money as 40k and Space Marines go, plus tend to be at least fairly general purpose and easy and satisfying to use in game. With their plasma affinity, some appear in the Dark Angels Combat Patrol box set if you were looking for some at discount. When on the tabletop, they cost 110 points for a squad of 5 of them, or 220 for a unit of 10. Standard Intercessor style bodies, with obviously the most exciting thing being their plasma gun profile. 2 shots out to 24 inches with strength 8, AP -3 and damage 2 when they're overcharged. It usually makes sense to do that against the vast majority of targets, maybe kind of contrary to their lore there, and they get the assault and heavy keywords. Particularly with boosted oath and moments, they can be really quite a strong threat against tougher stuff as well. Then their special rule is really quite a helpful one. For the chapter means that if they're slain on a 3+, they can fire on death. That can help out if any of their plasma incinerators go nuclear, and even reward you with a bit more firepower in your own turn, and be really quite a nice thing when the enemy is wiping them out with shooting in return, as it means that you might be able to get some valuable out of sequence damage and shoot something else that was just about to strike. They are quite a high investment fire support unit though. There certainly could be a unit that could justify a repulsor to transport them into battle and make sure they get the first strike and not the other way around. And for leader options, from generic Space Marines I'd be most tempted by a lieutenant. Lethal hits is great on those sort of mid-strength profiles. If you're playing Dark Angels, then Grandmaster Azrael could be another option. Overall, they're a pretty solid and easy to use unit. Fairly standout damage against elite infantry and good enough against everything else. They do have some good competition just for overall efficiency for the points cost though, compared with other Space Marine units out there, and perhaps particularly battle tanks that are a bit more durable than they are. Overall definitely usable though. I've given them a 7.5 out of 10 for power. Next up for our Space Marines with special weapons, we've got the Infernus Squad, introduced fairly recently in 10th edition. These guys are basically Hellblaster equivalents, but with flamers, and Space Marine chapters often equip their battle brothers with the Pyreblasters if they expect to be fighting Xenos hordes that are in enormous numbers, which certain factions out there, such as the Orcs and Tyranids, are particularly liable to do. Their Pyreblaster is essentially an improved flamer, dousing the enemy in blasts of Promethium, and usually hitting with more force and at greater range than the flamers of most factions in Warhammer 40k. For chapters that are particularly likely to use them, the puritanical Black Templars enjoy purging any heretics with flame, and of course they're a staple unit for the Salamanders, immolating the enemies of the Emperor with the Wrath of the Dragon. Models wise, their miniatures first appeared in the Leviathan box set at the start of 10th edition, and then they got a solo release, but the models didn't have any updates, so compared with just about any of the other 10-man Space Marine squads out there, they're particularly simplistic and are just very mono-build. It does mean they cost very slightly less though, it would seem, £37 or $60, so some of the cheapest Space Marine bodies that you can get. In reality, in 10th edition, they should be even cheaper though, both appearing in the Leviathan box set, and then the 40k starter set means there's just lots of them going around second hand. There may be a unit that you only really want so many of, so that means that second hand markets on eBay usually have them going at cheap prices. I'd imagine the new Salamanders Combat Patrol with a unit of them might continue to help with that as well. On the battlefield, they're also a fairly straightforward unit, standard Space Marine bodies with the Pyreblaster, a torrent weapon that fires out to 12-inch range with strength 5, AP 1 and damage 1. It got a boost with better AP mid-edition, so basically fires with all the strength and ferocity of a heavy flamer for most factions. It's still going to be locked to being fairly good against lighter to medium infantry though, and they are a bit more expensive than the fair few Space Marine squads out there, being 90 points per 5. Having a slightly unexciting Battleshock datasheet special rule, perhaps their biggest draw is the ability to do Overwatch in a really big way. That means that you might be able to fire with them both in your turn and in the enemy's turn to barbecue some troops moving up to a mid-board objective, or just make the prospect of doing that so unlikely that they just don't do it in the first place. For perhaps their strongest form though, Salamanders do well with them on the tabletop and in the lore. They enjoy the Firestorm Assault Force and Vulcan's unique detachment version of it. The assault keyword helps them get in range with the short range, and having strength 6 is a nice breakpoint against a bunch of stuff. And if you do field them in an army with Vulcan himself, you could potentially be re-rolling wound rolls, maybe even getting devastating wounds if you sacrifice some command points. Salamanders and Infernus Marines can be genuinely very intimidating. While I would rate them stronger for the Salamanders, for the majority of armies out there though, they do feel a bit on the subpar side at the moment. They're very good at dealing damage to lighter infantry, though there's just no guarantee that that's actually what they're going to be in range of. They'll be a bit more underwhelming against tough stuff and high saves, and then also needing to get close so they'll be right in range of retribution. If you're looking for horde clearance Space Marines, my first choice would likely be Intercessors as well, coming with that very nice sticky objectives rule and better OC. They also do a great job of pulverising hordes and can do so at a longer range. As a result, I've given them a 6 out of 10. Still definitely not unplayable, and really strong in Salamanders, though maybe a bit overshadowed. Next up, we've got the heavy fire support Space Marines with the Devastator Squad. Devastators are usually equipped for long-range fire support and can be equipped with a very wide variety of weapons, tank-destroying las cannons to infantry-destroying heavy bolters, and grav cannons and multi-melters to handle armoured targets. Many chapters classically use a mix of the different heavy weapons within one squad to create a balanced firebase that's likely to be able to engage all targets, though depending on the enemies they're engaging or the chapter's preferences, they might be dedicated to one heavy weapon. The sergeant conducts the squad's firepower, augmented by Signum and Auspices, and while most of the time they might be conducting long-range fire support and defensive things, for certain heavy weapons they need to get up close, such as multi-melters, and might employ drop pods to get them there, such as in a Skyhammer formation. For their miniatures, they come in 5 models in a box, and again they're firstborn Space Marines, so shorter stature and more risk of being updated versus the Primaris out there, but it generally felt like they were pretty nicely realised firstborn kits with a whole ton of fun weapon options. They also have a rather creepy looking Armorium Cherub construct hefting a melter bomb. The sprues really are pretty busy ones, jam-packed with components. I believe you can field 2 of any one heavy weapon type, and then they've got perhaps a surprisingly extensive choice of weapons that you can give the squad sergeant. It does mean that if you want a dedicated firebase with one heavy weapon in it though, then you might have to get 2 boxes. In game, the Devastators are 120 points to field 5 of them, 200 points to field 10, given that the extra 5 expansion only have basic bolters. They get 4 heavy weapons out of the big Space Marine list choice. In 10th edition, maybe the most popular choices being the las cannon, multi-melter, or grav cannon perhaps. Las cannons do anti-tank at long range. Multi-melters just generally pretty fearsome damage and can take certain buffs well. And grav cannons have got interesting anti-keywords that can be effective against a fair range of targets. The sergeant also helps buff the squad as well. The signum means that you can ignore cover if you're stationary, which you'd usually want to be anyway if possible, to avoid hitting on a 4+, and the Armorium Cherub can flip a dice once per game to an unmodified 6, effectively guaranteeing you 1 extra hit that turn. Devastators are kind of rarely used, though do have some interesting combos. The multi-melter ones can work quite well with the wound rerolls that a Razorback can bring, and particularly so in the Firestorm Assault Force, getting them up to a strength 10 up close, and being able to advance and shoot if they need to. I've also seen them get used from time to time in the Librarius Task Force. They can't be led by many damage dealing characters, but a Librarian can join them there for some good rerolls, and a squad with a bunch of las cannons for some anti-tank is maybe a bit more threatening and efficient there. Overall though, they definitely have some downsides. They aren't very mobile if they don't want to be hitting on a 4+, and they're far more fragile than the equivalent battle tanks that they might be rivals with, and the battle tanks and shooty dreadnoughts often have very similar or better firepower. Overall I've given them a 6 out of 10 for power, maybe a bit on the niche side out of the Space Marine firebase options. For perhaps their biggest Primaris rivals, there's the Desolation Squad. They sort of feel like they're supposed to compete and rival the Devastators. They're long-range fire support Space Marines equipped with multiple rocket launchers, another squad broadly all having the same war gear loadout, and they've got their curious missile launcher on a missile launcher design. The big tube rockets on the top are either super frag or super crack missiles, big ones with some additional punch compared with some missile launcher profiles in the game, and then they can also do some indirect fire. All of them have a belt-fed Castellan missile launcher underslung under that, and the sergeant can take a mighty Vanguard launcher, which basically has the power of a minor artillery piece. These can rain missiles down out of line of sight, pinning down and destroying foes that thought they were safe behind cover. Models wise, they come in a 5 model box set for $60 and £37. I think it's safe to say they weren't the best received models. In my recent best and worst miniatures video, they were voted the single worst looking Space Marine units. I think mainly due to Games Workshop overcomplicating what could have been a pretty simple and effective missile launcher design. It's just a bit unusual to have a small missile launcher in that Castellan launcher that's also belt fed and looks weirdly tiny, and then have those rocket tubes perched on top of that. So you're putting missile launchers on your missile launchers, and maybe not really helped with the idea that the Castellan missiles probably want to fire up in the air as a barrage weapon, where the other ones want to fire direct. It just maybe looks a bit more like something an Orc mech might create than high-tech Space Marine war gear. Otherwise though, they're fairly straightforward Primaris Space Marines. The squad does have a few options. You can assemble the missile launchers with the flaps open and closed, and they have different appearances for the frag and the crack rockets. Plus there's the option to give the sergeant that Vanguard launcher, which has generally been a very good choice while it existed. They're fairly recent models as they go. They came out in the Strike Force Aggressors box set towards the tail end of 9th edition. With their curious designs, people have enjoyed ripping into them a bit. I quite enjoyed these ones with the guns edited to be Nerf guns, and one common proposed solution for their looks has been to perch the missile launcher on their backpack, so they've got more sort of 2 distinct guns as opposed to one that's linked together. In game, towards the start of 10th edition, the Desolation Squad was kind of broken for how strong it was. Games Workshop hit it very hard with nerfs though and put it all the way up to a massive 200 points, making them the single most expensive Space Marine infantry, aside from Centurions, I guess. Their direct fire options are the Super Crack rockets, which hit far harder than the Super Frags, hitting at strength 10 and damage d6 plus 1. Though the real reason that they're charged quite a lot is indirect fire, which can be pretty good for clearing out lighter infantry that's hiding behind cover. The Castellan launch is only strength 4 and damage 1, but they do ignore cover, and you'll get multiple copies of the blast keyword, so they can stack quite a lot of hits, and could be a good option to buff with Oath of Moment turn 1. The Vanguard launcher does the lion's share of the damage though. D6 shots at strength 7, AP 1 and damage 2 hits far harder. Since they went up to 200 points, they've been quite niche. People do genuinely use them from time to time in competitive lists though. In a meta where people aren't really expecting indirect fire all that much, even a little bit can have some outsized value, perhaps particularly clearing out enemy objective grabbers or maybe Eldari aspect warriors, in particular with Oath of Moment giving a +1 to wound for the core Codex Space Marines. They can hit pretty hard and could be a good option for the Storm of Fire stratagem with Gladius if it's going to get you an extra pip of AP turn 1. For most people's purposes outside of high-end tournament things though, I feel like they're pretty niche. I've given them a 6 out of 10 for in-game power. Next up, let's move on to some Space Marine Veteran squads and start out with the Sternguard. Space Marine Veterans typically tend to be part of their first company, similar to the Terminators, that often take to the field in many other ways, typically well armed and armoured when they do though. Sternguard Veterans are veteran formations that excel at long-range combat. They get their pick of the chapter's armoury for that, often wielding special issue ammo bolters and combi weapons to bring down their targets. Many of them might be relic weapons or master crafters. As a result, they're veteran Space Marines with unerring accuracy and particularly deadly bolters, so feel like they might be the peak exemplar of the standard Space Marine with a bolter. Perhaps one of the single most famed heroes for leading formations of Sternguard is Pedro Cantor, the chapter master of the Crimson Fists, often fielding formations of them in the direst circumstances and cutting down any assailing foes with disciplined bolter fire. For their miniatures, they were redone for 10th edition and were an interesting development in Primaris and Firstborn things, and perhaps similar to the Terminators were one of the examples of a Space Marine unit more being directly updated and upgraded to Primaris, as opposed to releasing something tangential and almost the same but not quite. You get 5 of them in a box for $62 or £40, and they're a bit more ornate and fancy than regular Primaris Space Marines, getting some tabard loincloths and sporting a few relic plates from different forms of power armour, such as the guy with the Mark 7 head on the top left. The core kit can allow you to field the entire squad with fancy bolt guns, or field everyone with combi weapons like this guy at the front here, though there were some mixed feelings about them just getting one consolidated profile in 10th edition. There's also the choice for one model to either have a pyre cannon versus a heavy bolter, and the sergeant gets some melee gear as well. He can take a power sword or fist. At 10th edition launch, they had a monopose version of the squad from the Leviathan box set. I'm sure a fair few Space Marine collectors out there have got their hands on those, though I guess this one won't be sold anymore. And it's interesting to look back at the multiple previous versions of the unit. They have had multiple Firstborn versions from 4th and 5th edition before making the jump to Primaris. In game, there are 100 points to field 5 of them, or 200 to field 10. They've got a fairly standard issue basic Space Marine stat line, though they do have more attacks in melee. And then their bolt rifles pack a really big punch, basically sort of Intercessor style bolt rifles, but also getting rapid fire 1 on top of that, so you get 3 shots at 12-inch range and devastating wounds too, which keeps them relevant against tough stuff. The heavy bolters are also kind of similar, getting devastating wounds as well. Last year, Games Workshop changed the Sternguard special rule to be really quite a powerful and impactful one. Now it's absolutely murderous to attacking the Oath of Moment target. Each time a model in the squad attacks the target that's marked for the Oath of Moment, you can re-roll the wound roll as well as the hit roll you'll be able to re-roll. And plus if you're a core Codex chapter as well, you'll also get the +1 to wound. It just means a whole load of their attacks should be converting, and that's great for the devastating wounds on the bolters. Weirdly though, it can also make them into an incredibly dangerous melee unit against the Oath of Moment target as well. They do get a power fist in the unit with 4 attacks, and then if you add a Space Marine captain or something, you then have a unit that's going to be re-rolling all hits, wounds, and +1 to wound potentially against the Oath target, and that's absolutely amazing on the captain's profile. Overall, as a result, they're a pretty scary damage dealer unit. If you can line up a round of both shooting and melee or an Oath target, they're going to take huge chunks out of literally everything in the game. Though maybe the downside is that if you're taking them, they do need to plan around doing that, as otherwise they're going to cost a bit much for what they do if you're not making use of that really good special rule. I would probably rate them as best in small units with a character attached. They can do things like Librarius Conclave with a big unit and the Fusillade enhancement, and Azrael can work quite well with them in Dark Angels. Overall, I've given them an 8 out of 10 for power. Moving on to close quarters veteran Space Marines next, we have the Bladeguard Veterans. These guys are the chapter's fighting elite on foot, expert swordsmen capable of tangling with the enemy's greatest elites out there, equipped with mastercrafted power swords and storm shields. They perhaps feel like the spiritual successor to the Vanguard Veterans on foot for the Primaris age. Perhaps the coolest appearance that Bladeguard have had is their starring role in the secret level animation, fighting alongside Lieutenant Titus and giving no quarter against cultist or Tzeentch demons. For their model kit, they're another one of the 3 model elite box sets, though I feel like compared with some of these, they do come with some pretty good spares and a wide variety of poses. Each of the models has multiple different ways in which you can assemble them, the fairly standard sword and shield drawn style pose, and various ones with pistols too. Which is quite helpful that they have quite a lot of spare bits with shields and swords on top of that, which means that you could kit bash other Space Marine bodies into more Bladeguard if you wanted to, or just serve as spares if you wanted to make some custom characters. The Bladeguard models were particularly well received. They first came out in the Indomitus box set at the start of 9th edition, and in my recent polls and videos on the channel they were voted the favourite Space Marine models in terms of appearance. I think people really quite enjoyed seeing the fairly plain and unadorned Primaris go down a bit more of the classic sort of weird Space Knight style vibe that Space Marines tend to have. The relic shields, iron halos and tilt plates are all rather cool. Otherwise, they're also available in the Honored of the Chapter box set alongside the Eradicators and a clutch of characters, and when they came out around the dawn of 9th edition, they also had some themed characters to go alongside them, both a captain and a lieutenant done in the Bladeguard style, plus the fairly fun Bladeguard Ancient seen on the left here. In-game, it's 80 points to field 3 Bladeguard Veterans, 160 points to field 6 of them. They have a bonus wound compared with most Space Marines, so are a little bit sturdier to take down on an individual level, particularly with the 4+ invulnerable save for the Storm Shield. They do have some heavy bolt pistols, though their main event is in melee, a mastercrafted power sword with 4 attacks hitting at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, and their special rule can just add a little bits to either damage or defense, re-rolling ones to hit or ones to save as necessary. The strength 5 and damage 2 profile is rather good at killing things like standard Space Marines or other elite infantry out there, but they particularly get on well with anything that's going to make them better against tougher stuff, Blood Angels with increased strength or Red Rampage, Black Templars with their +1 to wound things, or Lieutenants or the boosted Oath of Moment, all of which can make them far more relevant against tough tanks and vehicles. Overall, I feel like they're in a fairly good place for Space Marines right now, fairly efficient at 80 points and reasonable enough to back up with characters. It's at least fairly common to see them with a Judas here for fights first, which can make them intimidating for enemy melee to tangle with. Overall, I've given them an 8 out of 10 for power here. Finally, for our flavours of veterans, we've got the Vanguard Veterans. Their speedy jump pack infantry, again with a vast amount of relic war gear to pull on from the chapter's armoury, and they can deploy on foot and use their jump packs to close rapidly, or do daring rapid insertion drops from Thunderhawk gunships, descending like angels on wings of fire to dispatch the foes of the Emperor. Like other jump pack forces, they're particularly famous for fighting alongside the Blood Angels and the Raven Guard, perhaps beyond others. The Raven Guard in particular are known to make use of formations of them with twin lightning claws, fighting in the style of their Primarch. Miniatures wise, the Vanguard Veterans come in a 5 model box set and are another one of the remaining firstborn kits left for the Space Marines. They're $60 or £37 for a set of 5 of them, and again I'd mark these as one of the single most likely ones to get an update, and likely within the next year. Probably getting an update in early 11th edition if they don't have one in 10th. I feel like the miniatures are pretty nicely done for what they are. They're one of the kits that's the most generous in terms of fancy melee weapons, and picking up a set of them can be a good source of bits for kit bashing other stuff. They've got lots of lightning claws, storm shields and thunder hammers in particular, which aren't always super easy to come by. As mentioned previously, you can field Vanguard Veterans on foot as well as jumping through the skies. I guess with their reinterpretation, maybe Bladeguard will now take the on-foot veteran role, and the Vanguard Veterans will stick with the jump packs. In-game, Games Workshop recently reduced the points cost for them. They're now 95 points for a squad of 5 or 190 for a squad of 10, so at least kind of close to jump intercessors on the small squad side at least. They move 12 inches with the fly keyword and can deep strike in if you'd like to. I think people were a little bit surprised and disappointed as to how weedy their melee weapons are though. They get 4 attacks each at strength 5, AP 1 and damage 1. Not too bad against hordes, but not particularly threatening beyond that, even if they do get lethal hits on the charge, which helps out a tiny bit. I think it was just a bit of a come down from having mass thunderhammers in a unit going to what's effectively a slightly boosted chainsaw profile. For their major war gear choice, they've got the choice between pistols versus storm shields. I've seen more people take the shields for the 4+ invulnerable save, though if you just want maximal damage and accept they're probably going to get wiped out after, the pistols genuinely aren't bad, and there are some arguments you could make for all 3 of the fancy ones. I'd still probably say that jump intercessors have a little bit of an edge on them, but given there's only a 5-point difference, you can certainly make an argument for them as a utility unit, dropping in and doing skirmish things like the jump intercessors, and potentially being harder to kill with storm shields on the strike back. Overall, I've given them a 7 out of 10 for in-game power. Next up, and I guess sticking with Veterans of Assault, we've got the Company Heroes. These are more the Primaris equivalent of the Command Squad, essentially an elite bodyguard and escort for the company captain or other high-ranking chapter individual. Usually with a couple of elite veteran bodyguards, and then also a couple of honoured ceremonial positions within the chapter, with the company champion ready to lay low the leaders of the enemy, and the ancient flying the company flag for all to see, inspiring their comrades and a challenge to the enemies. The company heroes feel like they're maybe just a slightly indirect successor to the previous Space Marine Command Squad. In the past they might have had an apothecary in their ranks, and in going even further back perhaps a tech marine as well, but the general feel and vibe is fairly similar. Here are their models now though. The Company Heroes kit costs $65 or £42.50 for 5 models, so maybe a little expensive on the money side, but you get 4 Company Hero models and then a captain who can be fielded separately. The Command Squad style models themselves are at least fairly set in both appearance and loadout. There's a company champion with a power sword, an ancient flying the banner, a veteran with a heavy bolter, and a veteran with a mastercrafted bolt rifle. The captain does have a few choices, being able to take a power fist, as well as all serving together in one squad. In other games you could potentially use the ancient as an individual character model if you'd like to, or maybe use the champion as a lieutenant or Judiceer or something. In game, the squad of 4 models, it's 105 points, and they must have a captain or chapter master attached to them. It does mean they're a bit inflexible, so can't bodyguard other chapter leaders such as librarians or chaplains. They do take their bodyguard duties quite seriously though. Each one of the models has 4 wounds, so is unusually tanky for a standard size Space Marine model. They get a -1 to wound if they have the attached character, and that certainly means the opponent's going to need some volume fire to chew through them. Then for the specialist, the squad's got a bit of a mix of damage. The company champion can help out with a bit of quality melee attacks, 6 attacks at strength 5, damage 2 with precision to snipe some characters. The heavy bolter and bolt rifle can chip in at range, and the ancient gives the squad some extra OC. Weirdly though, I feel like they often aren't necessarily the best choice for captains themselves, as they often want to be giving free stratagems to more threatening units. They perhaps tend to be most popular with named characters. Marnius Calgar with them is a bit of a staple, given that you also get the tough Victrix guards in there. Overall, they're quite a nasty bully unit with a fair bit of defense. They pair well with Vulcan Hestarn to get him to the midboard and use all of his OC, but you could combine with Uriel Ventress as another tanky unit in an Impulsor perhaps, keep his -1 command point benefit safe, and also deep strike something else. Overall, between all those, I think they definitely have value, but I'd say more so if you've got one of the named characters that gets on particularly well with them. Overall, I've given them a 7.5 out of 10 for in-game power on their own merit. They may be a little bit less standout than before they went up in points. Next up, we've got the Space Marine Neophytes in the Scout Squad. These are basically Space Marine training inductees who haven't yet earned their rights to power armor and are usually presided over in their training and instructed by a veteran sergeant while undertaking dangerous missions on active frontline duty. It's certainly a trial by fire for more raw recruits, highly dangerous, and a great proportion of aspirant scouts don't survive. In chapter formations, they typically serve in a chapter's 10th company, often squads getting seconded out to other companies to serve as infiltrators and reconnaissance experts, maybe fighting side by side with the Vanguard Space Marine elements. They're fast and mobile in lighter carapace armour, and have quite a varied mix of war gear that they can be deployed with, shotguns, bolters and other small arms. Not every Space Marine chapter treats their inductees in the same way as the Scouts though. For example, the Black Templars pair them with an Initiate and deploy them in Crusader squads, whereas the Space Wolves field them in mass packs of Bloodclaw units with young and hot-headed Space Vikings keen to charge in a berserk charge for glory. For the model kits, these Scouts were redone kind of recently. They had a Kiltian box set that came out early in 10th edition, and are the single priciest 10-man Space Marine box set available to the core Space Marines at $80, £47 or €62. The reason they're more expensive is that they're a kill team kit which has a premium on it, and also within the 10-man box set it's really sort of 2 5-man box sets but bundled together. So each half of the box can assemble all the scouts that you need, so you could assemble them with 2 sergeants, 2 sniper rifles and 2 heavy weapons if you'd like to. As mentioned, they do have plenty of options. For their basic loadouts, they can have 2 flavours of small arms with standard bolters or scout shotguns, or go in with bolt pistol and savage combat knives. One can take a sniper rifle, though unfortunately you can no longer field entire squads of that. That's left to the Eliminators apparently now, and one man in the unit can either field a missile launcher or heavy bolter to add a bit of firepower. For their points cost, they're generally fielded in units of 5 more commonly, and that gets you 70 points for a unit of Space Marines. They still have the 2 wounds, though slightly less defense with a carapace armor, only having a 4+ save rather than a 3, and their primary value is being a pretty excellent utility unit for the Space Marines. They can infiltrate, so set up forward, and be an expendable screening unit ready to do objectives. They can still actually scout 6 inches, so can do a bit of repositioning depending on whether you've got first or second turn. Really great to have that on an infiltrating unit, and their special rule is rather good as well, being able to return to reserve, so if late game they're out of position, they could move around the board to potentially spring up somewhere unexpected and maybe threaten the enemy home field. I say compared with just being bodies where they need to be, their weapons aren't the most important thing in the world. I think I'd usually both take the heavy weapon and the chainsword and the sergeant, and then you could field a ranged squad with some shotguns and a sniper rifle, or a more melee orientated one with the combat knives, which can still hit perhaps surprisingly hard for a frontline unit in say Blood Angels or Black Templars. Overall, for a cheap points cost, some fairly godly utility, and still being alright for damage and defense, they're a pretty standout unit right now. Very hard to go wrong with 1 or 2 units in just about any Space Marine army list. I've given them a 9 out of 10 for power. Talking of scouts and infiltrating though, we've got the other Vanguard Space Marines next. These are the ones that are clad in Mark 10 Furboss armour, basically the slims down and slightly lighter variant of the Mark 10 armour, prioritising speed, movement and sneakiness as opposed to raw might. The infiltrators maybe feel like they're the single most standard of the Phobos Vanguard Space Marines, infantry fielded with bolters and often making up a mainstay of a Vanguard force. These guys are deployed on stealth, sabotage and recon missions. They're armed with marksman bolt carbines and equipped with smoke bombs to cover their advance or for a sneaky getaway. The other more technical bit of kit is an Omni Scrambler, aerials protruding from their backpacks that shut off enemy communications nearby, helping them get in, achieve their mission and get out without the wider enemy command structure being aware. They often tend to operate independently, and that can mean that certain squads are issued with other assets like a Helix Adept Medic or comm specialist to receive orders from afar. For their model kit, you get 10 of them in a box, $62 or £40. Again, maybe not too terrible as points and plastic for the money goes, at least compared with some other Warhammer. They're models in Phobos armour, which have the sort of curved shoulder pad on one side, and then having an absent pauldron on the other side, slightly smaller armour plates on the legs and things, and they have their distinctive aerials and marksman bolt carbines with the fancy scopes on top. Previously they had the option to be bought as a kill team set, which had an upgrade frame for the Helix Adept in it, though I believe that's been taken off sale at this point. The way to get that at the moment will be in that Vanguard Task Force box set once again, the one with the suppressors. If you do want to get infiltrators, it's not really the worst idea in the world. You get 10 of them in there along with their specialists. Be aware they're more monopose sculpts that don't have the dual build option with the Incursors though. In game, the infiltrators are usually fielded in squads of 5, 100 points for those, and for their actual stat line and damage and defense, they're not really much to write home about. 2 shots at strength 4, AP 0, so fairly standard bolter shots there. The Helix Gauntlet does make them a tiny bit tougher than certain other Space Marines, giving them a 6+ feel no pain. For their value for an army though, they've got 2 different ways to play. Their Omni Scrambler special rule can mean that they're great for guarding a home field objective, as it means that enemies can't deep strike within 12 inches, so you basically guarantee that they can't deep strike and charge you, and they might be better at screening out the backfield from reserves in general. Otherwise, if enemy reserves or teleport shenanigans aren't going to be the biggest deal in any one game, they can just use their actual infiltrate rule and deploy in the mid-boards to be a screening and skirmish unit. Overall, it means they can be a bit of an asset to an overall army list. I'd usually say they're a unit to take one of, but not more given their very, very low damage. Though I've seen some people quite like to take a Phobos Librarian along with them, giving them sort of lone operative protection, so you can't either deep strike near them or shoot them from long range either. Overall, they feel like a luxury pick to hold down a home field objective. Maybe their biggest rivals in the list could be the standard Intercessor Squad, where they're also very good for the home objective babysitter role with the sticky objectives and some good shooting stats. In any case though, I'd still rate them as strong. I've given them an 8.5 out of 10 here. For their counterpart option, we have the Incursor Squad. They're deployed in a similar sort of stealth role, and are maybe more of a minor variant on the Phobos armor themes. They perhaps tend to be a bit more of an aggressive assault stance versus the Infiltrators, charging in with their Oculus bolt carbines, marking targets for other assets in the chapter, and setting about the enemy with their paired combat blades. If there's enemy vehicles and war machines about, they might be issued with a haywire mine to sabotage one key asset. They're basically the dual build kits from the Infiltrator box set, maybe not really enormously different. They've got slightly different helms, scanner packs and bolt carbines. Otherwise they're fairly similar though. You've got the haywire mine model that you can put beside them that's a counter to represent until it's gone. And there's the visual representation of their combat knives as well, strapped to their thighs normally. In game, they're 85 points to field squads of them, again normally fielded in squads of 5. They can scout 6 inches towards the enemy, so can move up to the mid-board to skirmish over the mid-board objectives. Again, like the Infiltrators, have a bit of light bolt fire, quite helpful keywords with assault and ignores cover I suppose, and have a bit more threat in melee than the Infiltrators, their combat knives both getting them AP-1 and sustained hits. Their Haywire Mine can genuinely be pretty impactful the first time that they make contact with something, a few bonus mortal wounds and potentially 2d3 of them against vehicle keyword units, so that's really quite a big damage punch if they contact one of those. Perhaps their biggest special rule is marking targets for the rest of your army though. They can ping one unit that they've shot, and that target's a +1 to hit for the entire rest of your Space Marine army this shooting phase, which means that they can light the way for some really serious guns to light something up. It means that if you've got a Space Marine Firebase list, you can have a lot of them hitting on a 2+ if you'd like to, though it maybe does have a little bit of overlap and redundancy with Oath of Moment. Overall, that's really quite a lot of utility for a Space Marine skirmish unit. I've given them an 8 out of 10. They're a really solid choice for any army that's got a fair bit of Space Marine firepower, though again, like quite a lot of Space Marine utility units, there's maybe diminishing returns after a squad of them. Plenty of people choose to get one copy of their special rule on the go, and then take other things after that. I've given them an 8 out of 10 for in-game power. Next up for the Phobos Marines, we've got the Scout Snipers that are the Eliminators. Again, they're clad in the slimmed down Phobos armour and are employed as Vanguard marksmen, hunting and killing enemy commanders to sow discord and communication loss in the ranks, usually operating in small teams of just 3, and aiming to escape detection from the enemy at large. For their typical loadout, they're usually equipped with their bolt sniper rifles plus camo cloaks to keep them under wraps. So if the mission in question calls for heavy fire support, they can exchange those for las fusils, kind of like small portable las cannons to hunt down lighter vehicles and other armoured targets. They're perhaps most famed for being used by the Raven Guard. They get on well with stealthy Phobos strike forces in general, but feels like the Eliminators with their disruption and stealth tactics really play into their way of war. In their model kits, there's 3 Eliminators in a box for $60 or £37. Again, at least quite a big price tag in my opinion for just 3 standard sized Space Marines. As with plenty of these 3 model elite box sets, they have a few different poses that can have them loading or firing their sniper rifles, plus their weapon swap, and the sergeant has the option to take an Instigator bolt carbine as a small arm instead. I must admit I quite like their models. I like the mix of the camo cloak with the big sniper rifles and the Space Marine armour. I think it looks pretty fun. And again, as we mentioned the box set a few times before, they're available in that Vanguard Task Force one, though they are monopose models there, only equipped with the bolt sniper rifles. In game, they're 85 points for a squad of 3 of them, so really are quite expensive per model and have got very bad defense for the cost, just 2 wounds at toughness 4, and even with -1 to hit from stealth, it's still not all that great. They can infiltrate into the mid-board, though maybe are a little bit less comfortable or expendable being on the front line versus scouts. Instead having a bit more of a mix between their utility value and their damage value. Both their bolt sniper rifles and las fusils can be interesting enough depending on the target. Ideally they really want to be stationary if possible though. That allows them to hit on a 2+ and get devastating wounds. It just feels a bit unlikely that they're necessarily going to get the opportunity to just sit and remain stationary and shoot for several turns over though, as they feel like they'd be quite high priority targets for the enemy to take down if they are exposed. I haven't really seen too many people use Eliminators in 10th edition, which is a shame. There are quite a few that have pick up an Instigator bolt carbine for the sergeant, which interestingly enough gives them a special rule to allow them to reposition under covering fire, basically giving the unit a move shoot move, so you can potentially move 12 inches in a turn or pop out of cover and then hide again, though it does come with the downside of having one less big shooty special weapon in the squad. Overall I feel like they're overcosted for the points at the moment. They could do with going down in points again, maybe a good 10 or 15 or so to rival scouts a bit better. They just feel a bit outclassed by scouts for the infiltrate role and then other damage dealers if you actually want to shoot things hard. I've given them a 6.5 out of 10 for in-game power. Finally for the ranks of Phobos Marines we've got the Primaris Reivers. They're the spooky and scary Space Marine terror troops with the skull masks, sowing discord and shock and awe through the enemy's forces. They've got more ways of getting around the battlefield than most Phobos units. They can use grav shoots to drop in from on high, and grapnel launchers to scale cliffs and buildings that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. When they close with the enemy, it often is led with a battery of shock grenades to stun and disorientate them, before picking apart enemy squads with precision strikes from bolt carbines, blades and pistols. Between all that, they aim to slay commanders, sow discord and rout formations. Although I must admit I do quite enjoy the idea of Space Marine terror troops, I do find it kind of funny that the Primaris are extra scary with the skull masks on. Obviously that's far more terrifying than having your squad torn apart by a Space Marine with a more normal helmet. The Reivers are another 10-man box set, which isn't the worst thing in the world for value for models on the board. Again, sneaky Primaris and Phobos armour. The main choice that they have are whether or not to assemble them with blades and pistols versus bolt carbines, and you can choose to give them the grav shoots on their backs or leave them off if you'd like to. I quite like the shot out grapnel launcher part as well. It does look pretty fun, but also must be a bit of a pain to transport. Here's the bolt carbine, grav chute, and full skull mask helm. For the options for the Reivers, you can either give them half helms or fully enclosed helmets. I feel like they were maybe one of the squads that people tended to be a bit less well excited about towards the start of 8th when they came out. Feels like that kind of tactical sort of look divides opinions a bit for Space Marines. With models and lore things, it's perhaps worth mentioning the Space Wolves Hounds of Morkai. Until recently they sold these with their Space Wolf upgrade sprue, and they're a dedicated anti-psyker hunting version of the Reivers. They still seem to exist in lore, though for some reason were taken out of the Space Wolf Codex as an actual unit that's standalone that you could field, I guess just represented by regular Reivers in game now. Talking of how you do that, the standard Reaver squad is 80 points to field a squad of 5, 160 for a squad of 10, and their special kit gives them a few interesting ways to get into battle and around it. They can scout forward into the midboard, or choose to set up in the sky and have their grav chutes deploy them with deep strike. And then when they're on the board, grapnel launchers have the interesting rule to allow them to avoid measuring vertical distance when they move up and down places, so they could ping to the tops of ruins. And occasionally it could be useful charging squads in ruins as well. If they're trying to do that 1 inch from ruin wall trick and there's a floor above them, Reivers can engage them there. For their weaponry, it's mainly good against lighter infantry, a whole flurry of strength 4 damage 1 attacks of various different sorts. Since they gave the combat blades some AP, they feel like the clear way to go now. You get 4 attacks at AP -1 and a special issue bolt pistol attack, and all those have precision, so if the opponent's got a lighter character in the unit, there's the chance that you might make them fear the volume of attacks. Then finally, with their special rules all being about terror troops, the way that's represented now is to -1 from OC for units nearby. So it does mean that compared with other infantry units, they're far more likely to outcompete on objectives if both these and some enemies survive, and they hand out an extra battle shock in the fight phase, which occasionally could prevent some stratagems, though it doesn't tend to do that much really. It has been kind of impressive since they came out that Reivers have been so universally mid to bad. It's mainly the combination of damage output that's only really going to work against light stuff, and then their special theme being morale focus, which has typically had less impact than most. I'd say this incarnation of them is as strong as they've ever got, and even then they feel like a slightly passable utility unit that's got some solid rivals from things like jump intercessors. They're definitely nowhere near as unplayable as they used to be though, having a small deep striking squad to do secondary objectives and skirmish with the enemy and put those debuffs to work is alright. I've given them a 6.5 out of 10. I still rate jump intercessors as better for that role though, I think. Next up, we've got the Eradicators. I kind of meant to talk about them with the other sort of fire support Space Marines, but it seems that I didn't. These guys being Gravis armoured Space Marines equipped with melter weapons, and basically their role within a Space Marine chapter and formation is really quite simple. The utter immolation of enemy tanks, vehicles, and war machines. Melter weapons generally need to be deployed up close. The sturdy Gravis armour can potentially get them there in safety. They might not be the most mobile of Space Marines ever, but if they manage to successfully deploy and get within range of their target, it's likely going to be absolutely obliterated. And again, with their enjoyment of melter weapons, the Salamanders might particularly favour fielding Eradicator squads. In their box set, there are another 3 model elite box set for their standard sort of pricing, as with several others pretty pricey per model here, and otherwise fairly standard looking Gravis Marines, fairly similar to the heavy Intercessors, equipped with big long barrel melter rifles, and 1 per 3 of them can take a multi-melter. You can assemble the melters with slight variants, as with the Hellblasters and Intercessors, mercifully again not necessarily represented by game rules, and currently the difference between heavy melter rifles and regular melter rifles is just the aesthetic one that you most like. They came out in the Indomitors box set at the start of 9th edition, and the sprue that they were therein is still on sale in the Honour of the Chapter box set alongside the Bladeguard. If you're able to find the Dawn of War Onslaught box set anywhere near you, that can get this set for far cheaper. Their rules certainly made a bit of a stir when they first came out. It felt like Games Workshop wanted to sell some Eradicators with just the sheer amount of enormous damage they could do, perhaps being the single strongest unit in the game for a good chunk of early 9th edition. There wasn't really much else that could blow up tanks, monsters and vehicles in the same way that they could. They're certainly still rather fearsome on that front. It's 100 points for 3 Eradicators in game, or 200 for 6, so that's 33 points for a Gravis armor stat line there. And then for their melter weapons, they can shoot them to 18-inch range. Generally, a squad of 3 would have 2 multi-melter shots and 2 melter rifle shots that will hit more accurately. They should still be able to blow up a few elite infantry, though they really excel against tanks, monsters and vehicles, as their total obliteration rule just makes them go thoroughly next level for that, re-rolling all hit rolls, wound rolls and even damage rolls. So at least on paper, and particularly against things without invulnerable saves, they're one of the most efficient damage dealers around, and that gets even more so within half range where they get the +2 added to the melter damage. The exact numbers might have changed a little bit as a few points cost have shifted around, but they certainly still stack up absolutely enormously well versus the vast majority of competition for Space Marine anti-armor. If they can get within 18 range, they're pretty well joint best against a whole bunch of other targets, and then are just ridiculously efficient for their points cost if they get within 9, but you do have to get them there and keep them firing without having taken damage to be able to do that. As a result, realistically, they might need a bit of support getting there. They're fairly common to pair with a repulsor as a result. That's a better chance to drop them off within range, particularly with the extra 3 inches they can jump out the front. For detachment support, they'll really enjoy Firestorm Assault Force, which allows them to get advance and shoot, and also getting Strength 10 within 12 inches is no bad thing for them either. They'll do nicely in Gladius too, being able to both advance and shoot and fall back and shoot when they need to. All of that does come with some big trade-offs though. They're rather slow, not super durable for the points cost, and they're short range. They're also fairly mono-purpose as well. They're just not going to be anywhere near as good into other targets, even if they will fry a few elite infantry. They're also maybe more likely than some to get locked in melee. Overall still very solid for the tank destroying role for Space Marines. For in-game power I've given them an 8 out of 10. Finally we come to the biggest and stompiest Space Marine infantry of them all in the core codex, and these are the Space Marine Centurions. These are exosuits worn over a regular set of power armor to increase a Space Marine's size, strength, defense, and the amount of weapon systems that they can bear, essentially turning a regular Space Marine into a walking tank, impervious to small armor's fire, and having the might of massive las cannons and missile launchers at their fingertips. These were one of the very limited innovations before the Primaris era, the STC being unearthed in the 36th millennium and being put into use by a great number of chapters. For their wargear and patterns, they can be fielded as the Devastator Centurions, packing las cannons, grav cannons, and chest-mounted rockets. They're basically walking gun batteries all by themselves. Or they can be fielded in the Assault Centurion pattern. They've got enormous siege drills that can penetrate battle tanks of the very toughest armour, or drill straight through fortifications to flush out an entrenched enemy. Perhaps out of all the chapters to use Centurions, the Imperial Fist might be one of the more notable ones. The Devastator Centurions with a pair of heavy bolters are able to lay down bolter fire like almost nothing else. Models wise, it was safe to say they weren't particularly well received when they first came out, being a bit of a meme with their Space Marine inside a Space Marine sort of lore. It is a bit of a curious idea to be wearing a suit of armour on top of a suit of armour, though plenty of people have warmed up to them since, embracing them as one of the fun, stompy and impractical things of Warhammer 40K. As infantry models go, they do feel really quite expensive, 3 models in the box for $80 or £50, though admittedly they're sort of halfway between infantry and light vehicles, really quite bigger and chunkier, and a lot more so than Terminators. For their options, this is the Assault Centurion version. Those siege drills can also have either melters or flamers mounted alongside of them for extra firepower. Then the chest mounted bits either have the option for Centurion bolters or Fragstorm grenades. The dual build in the box set gives you a whole bunch of heavy weapons, either grav cannons, las cannons or heavy bolters being the different loadouts, and they can be quite a good source of extra spare bits if you happen to build the Assault Centurions here. Either way you will get a bunch of Space Marine special weapons left over. In game they have a chunky stat line, 4 wounds at toughness 7 with a 2+ save and fairly likely to be able to get cover. It's going to be quite a bit to chew through. They're going to be extra good for Armour of Contempt as well. They do move painfully slowly though, only a 4-inch movement means that they're not so far away from being static firepower. The Devastator Centurions are 165 points for 3 of them, or 330 for 6. The favoured loadout for those generally tends to be twin las cannons for some long-range, punchy twin-linked anti-tank, backed up by Centurion missile launchers, which get you D3 shots out to 36 inches with damage D3. The blast keyword on those means they're at least alright against infantry as well. They get to reroll hit rolls of 1 natively, and if the target's on an objective marker, they can reroll all hit rolls. Overall, the numbers stack up that they're really quite an efficient anti-tank damage source, but just with a big downside that they're not really moving anywhere particularly fast. So might struggle to rival the Space Marine gun tanks out there that can also do the same job. It means that any Space Marine detachment that allows them to return to reserves has a bit of extra value, so they're weirdly good in Vanguard Spearhead, or maybe even using the Deathwatch Teleportarium to be able to warp them around the board and be able to get lines of sight on what they want to. In Vanguard they will have to appear at the edges of the board though if they return to reserves with the strats in that way. Overall I'd rate them as solidly usable, good firepower but with some big downsides, slow movement being locked in combat and potentially certain special weapons being quite good into them. I've given them a 7.5 out of 10. Then finally we've got the Assault Centurion datasheets. They trade out heavy weapons for some melter guns or flamers plus siege drills. The siege drills get 3 attacks at strength 10, AP 2 and damage 3. They're twin linked so they should be wounding most things most of the time. and their special rule is to get a big damage boost against monsters, vehicles or fortifications. Sustained hits too means that they absolutely rip and tear against those. They come for the cheaper points cost of 150 points and might be a good one to think about using in a Land Raider. You can fit 3 in a regular Land Raider and then they can use its movement to get them to melee. Again, they do have some big downsides though. Perhaps the biggest one needing a lot of support to get them into the targets that they want to, but if they can get up close and survive to deal a round or two worth of damage, they're probably going to have a major impact. Overall, I've given them a 7 out of 10 for gameplay. With the Centurions talked about, I guess that's just about it for this one. Hope you've enjoyed a slightly higher effort video talking through all the Space Marine infantry types. I look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. Which of these Astartes models do you like in terms of looks and lore? Or which have you had most fun using on the tabletops in 10th edition so far? I look forward to all your insights as normal down in the comments. That's just about it for this one though. For the end of the video, I'll just quickly cycle back to the video sponsor and Tabletop Stronghold and briefly talk through their range of mag cases. As mentioned, they've got their magnetic carry cases, models lined up on different trays within those, and here's how many miniatures you can fit on any one tray. Around 90 odd 25mm bases, 30 Terminator equivalents or 6 Knight Armigers. And then those trays go in MDF carry cases of various different sizes. This one's the mini one, £72 or $75 with the AT25 code. That price includes shipping, but though there may be VAT or import duties in some areas around the world. Even in the small one, it can take a fair few miniatures though, quite a lot of Terminators and a couple of big tanks even in the little one. For the more army sized one, there's the regular mag case. This one's really quite a lot taller, as you can see by the Chaos Knights hanging out on the ground floor. It's around £114 or $120. All the mag cases come with some magnets to attach to the bases of your miniatures as well, and I'll leave the internal dimensions here on the screen. Finally, there's the really big one with the Mag Case XL, basically 2 of the previous attached together, should be big enough for certain entire collections, and this one's pictured with the clear acrylic sheet on the front. Then finally, they've got their MDF terrain set. This one's around the same price as the standard mag case, though comes a little cheaper if you buy alongside one of the mag cases, so it could be of interest if there's anyone looking for some terrain out there. In any case though, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, links down in the video description below. And be sure to use the AT25 code if you do happen to pick anything up through them. In any case, a big thank you for listening though. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to check out Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to help support the channel and keep the big videos coming like this, there's a Patreon page linked down in the video description. As well as supporting the channel, patrons get a few rewards, seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.